Julie. Oh, let me turn the sound off on my phone. Hold on. Okay. Hi, Lorette. Just getting a little organized. Hi, Stephanie. I think I might put my glasses back on. Okay. Now I can see you all much clearer. How is everybody today after eating all that matzah? Yeah, Adrian, welcome. Julie, how are you? So nice to see you. Esther, I think, is your Hebrew name, correct? I'm not sure. L'chaim, High Center cups. Still have a lot. Anybody's welcome to them. Dahlia, oh my gosh. Dahlia, how are you? So, Dahlia, can you type in Paz's full name so we could dedicate the class? Okay. Oh, somebody found some pictures. Sure, send them. I'd love to see them. They could be in my picture collection. So we'll wait another few minutes and then we'll start. Hi, Sherry. How are you? How is everybody? I actually have a new computer, so next week I'm hoping to get everything on the computer. Okay. So everybody, I want to dedicate the class today to my beloved friend Paz Feivel Ben David, whose yahrzeit was on the last day of Passover. And I know that he's looking down on his beautiful wife and children and dear beloved friends, and just for all the Torah learning which he loves so much, and for the beauty that he brought to the world. I want to dedicate the class tonight for his yahrzeit, his Lias and Neshama. And he should help bring Mashiach, because this is what we're going to talk about today. Really, Shemini, the eighth day. What does that mean? What does that mean? And I also want to dedicate the class today, since tomorrow is Yom HaShoah, is Holocaust Remembrance Day, and we'll talk a little bit about at the end of the class. I want to dedicate the class really to the people of Israel, for all the Jews that have family and relatives and themselves that have gone through that horrific experience, that their holy souls should just bring Mashiach in the world and bring holiness. You know, yesterday I got a call from Rabbi Shlomo Katz, my beloved Rabbi Shlomo Katz, and he called me from Mezhebush, from the grave of the Baal Shem Tov. And I can't tell you how thrilling it was, you know, to be actually there, to be able to experience it with him, that the Baal Shem Tov. And I remember that my husband Shlomo and I went. We went about 13 years ago after my mother's death, because she was born on the birthday of the Baal Shem Tov, and we went with Rabbi Ginsburg to really, we wanted to feel like, what is this? Who's the Baal Shem Tov? How did my mother become so connected to him? And it was our first time in the Ukraine. And I remember both Shlomo and I had the same experience, because we always were like very anxious about going, because we know that all over the Ukraine, Jews were murdered during World War II. You know, that Jewish blood was in the soil of the Ukraine. The town next, a little bit distance from Mezhebush, had, I think, 16,000 Jews murdered. I think in Mezhebush there were 3,000 Jews murdered. Everywhere that you went, there were murdered Jews. And I remember before going feeling that how are we going to, it's going to be so horrible to be there, and feel it. But the feeling that both of us had was something very different. It was like you could feel these holy souls. It was their spirituality, now that they were in the world of truth, and their essence of who they were, like, permeated the land in such a positive way that it was really a transformational spiritual experience for all of us that went. So, so many of us had family. My husband's parents just escaped, but all their family was killed in the Holocaust. My mother-in-law had, I think, 10 siblings, and only 2 of them survived. And my father-in-law, I don't know if any of his 10 or 12 siblings survived, and in my grandmother's family, my father's family, I don't know so much about their history, but in my grandmother's family, all her family that were left behind, only she, her and 2 brothers came, but they came early on. They came actually before World War I. But they had much family that was there. And so I want to dedicate the class tonight in memory of all of these holy souls. So there are a few things we're going to study tonight, and we're going to start with the Parsha, which is Parsha Shemini, which actually was the Parsha we read last week. So if any of you, hopefully all of you, are keeping up with the Parsha, that you'll see that it was the same Parsha last week and this week, because last Shabbos was the 7th day of Passover, and so there were special Torah readings for that day, and we did not read the Torah reading Parsha Shemini. So for this week, every day of the week we read a different piece, and then on Shabbos we're going to read the whole piece of the Parsha. So last week we did do something from the Parsha. We talked about Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron, whose souls left their body during the service on the 8th day of the dedication of the tabernacle. So today we're going to talk about 2 other aspects. Okay, so this is a teaching based on the teachings of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So it says, it came to pass on the 8th day. So this is how it opens up, the Parsha Shemini. And it describes the events on the day on which the Mishkan, which was the portable sanctuary that was built by the Jews, that it was inaugurated. So says it's called the 8th day because it was followed a 7-day training period during which the Mishkan was erected every morning and taken down every evening. And Aaron and his 4 sons were in hi, Sina. I have to smile and laugh when I see Sina's name. And for any of you that want to know, come to our next spa retreat and you'll find out. And we're going to be planning one, so yeah, we are. Sina's going to push me. So it was a day which our sages describe as possessing many firsts. It was a Sunday, which is the first day of the week. It was the first of the month of Nisan, which marks the beginning of the new year. That's the month that the Jewish nation was established as a nation. It was the first day that the divine presence came down and dwelt in the sanctuary. It was the first day of the Kahuna, meaning the practice of the Kohanim, and it was the first day of the service in the sanctuary and many other things. So with so many firsts, why is it referred to, and the whole entire portion is called the 8th day? So we know that the number 7 is very significant. We have the 7 work days. We have the 7 days of the week, where we have work and rest. We have the 7 days of creation. We know that in 6 days God made the heavens and the earth, and on the 7th day he rested. Every Shabbos is a full revolution of the original cycle of those 7 days, and we start again from the first day, and the first day is called Yom Rishon. That's how Sunday, that's the name for Sunday. And I just want to share that I remember seeing this, that when I lived in Jerusalem, I had the very good fortune to study with a Rebbe really, and his name was Rev Gedalia Koenig, Olav Shalom, and he was the head of the Breslov movement. And he was actually the Rebbe of my dear friend, Hannah Rachel. And when we were in Minnesota together studying at a yeshiva, oh, you hear a noise, Jill? No, it could be, I know probably what it is. Hold on. I'm going to close this. It could be that, is that better? It could be that I had my iPhone against my computer that was open, because I have my computer. Do you still hear the noise? Okay. I have my computer with my light. It's a long story. You don't have to know that long story. But so she would receive letters from him, and it's the first time I ever saw anyone. It's not better, Sina? You still hear a noise? Because I don't hear a noise anymore. Okay, tell me if you still hear a noise. If you do, there's nothing I could do about it, because I don't know where it would be coming from, because my computer is off. So the letter that you would get would be the date would not be like July 3rd, 1943 or something. It wasn't 43, obviously, but it would say Yom Rishon, or if he wrote the letter on a Wednesday, it would be, Yom Revi'i, and then it would go the complete sentence. Not only it would say today is the first day, the day that the service of the Levium were in the holy temple, and that's how it was addressed. That's how he addressed all the letters, by their significance as to what day of the week it was in the cycle of creation. Also, we know that there are many other 7-day things. There are 2 7-day festivals in our year. There's Passover, which is from the 15th to the 21st of Nisan. And then there's Sukkot, which is 6 months later in Tishrei, from the 15th to the 21st of the month of Tishrei. We celebrate a marriage for a full week. We call them Sheva Brachas, the 7 blessings, for including the wedding is one of the nights. For 7 complete nights, the bride and groom are blessed with festive meals. During the death of a family member, God forbid, we mourn for 7 days. There are 7 days of Shiva. There are, for women, in their cycle of family purity of entering into the mikveh days, there are 7 clean days for the women before they start counting in order to complete the purification process of immersing in a mikveh. There was 7 training days before the sanctuary was inaugurated, when it was put up and taken down for 7 days. There's a 7-day purification period from ritual impurity, and there are many other 7s. So there was the freedom of Passover, there was the joy of Sukkot, there's the bond of marriage, there's the law, God forbid, a loss, and all these features of Jewish life that are connected to 7. Also, our years, we have a 7-year cycle. There's 6 workday years, and then we have the sabbatical, which is the 7th year. And that's the suspension of work during that time on the land. So all agricultural work is suspended in the 7th year, and the land's produce is declared free for the taking. And also in the Shemitah year, it's called Shemitah, the year of rest, all private debts and terms of servitude that used to exist for indentured service were set free. And also the whole human history has to do with a 7 millennium a week, meaning there's 6,000 years of human labor in developing the world, and the 7th year will be holy, meaning not H-O-L-Y, but W-H-O-L-L-Y, holy Shabbos and rest forever. That is going to be the Messianic era. So we're going to be entering into that discussion. And according to Kabbalah, The 7 days of creation are embodied in the 7 sefirot, which are the divine emanations, the holy divine energy that is connected to the creation of the world, and where God has a vehicle to enter into our existence. So it says 7 is a number, but it's part of the whole creation, part of the creation as a whole. And we are created in the image of God, and our human character is composed of 7 drives. There's love, chesed, restraint, gevurah, harmony, tiferes, ambition, netzach, devotion, hod, connection, yesod, and receptiveness is malchus. So these mirror the 7 attributes which God assumed as the creator of the universe. And each of the 7 units have other qualities within them, and we call them the sefirot. But also this cycle consists of 2 primary phases. One is the mundane, and the other is holiness. We call it chol and kedusha. So there's 6 days of mundane labor are followed by a day of spiritual rest. 6 years of working the land are followed by the 7th year of Shemitah. 6 millennium with struggling and labor and everything connected to physicality is followed by the 7th millennium, which will be the sole occupation, will be the knowledge of God. That sounds good. So Kedusha is the word for holy, and it means removed and apart. And it's the Shabbat is the 7th day. Shemitah is the 7th, and it means to cease or suspend your work. For holiness means that you have complete disentanglement from the physical, from material involvements. And this is so important in order to observe Shabbos. You know, people are very, very careful to really get in the spirit of Shabbos by refraining from discussing workday things. You know, whenever I have Shabbos dinners, or I used to have large Shabbos dinners, and there was some current event or, you know, hot topic in the world, and everybody was so eager to discuss it, I would really try in a very kind, gentle way to say, let's just talk about Shabbos. Let's just talk about Torah. Let's just talk about the Parsha. You know, we're so inundated, and holiness means we separate ourselves out from that for one day. And we're not saying, you know, never be involved, but we're saying give yourself the beauty, the absolute beauty of what Shabbos can give to you. So we want to touch base with holiness, and in the Shemitah year, we stop all physical work on the land, and this is what we're going to be doing in the Messianic era. We're practicing, actually. So, and we know that Shabbos does affect the rest of the week. So it's not like only that there's Shabbos and then we forget about it. No, its effect goes into the week, and because we need boundaries. Boundaries are important between the mundane and the holy, and they are enforced for the purpose of us experiencing holiness in our lives, and this is the way we do it. And then we bring that holiness with us into our workday week. So the 7th year, the 7th day, the 7th millennium constitute all parts of the cycle of creation. And even though materiality and spirituality differ greatly, both are part of nature, and both are governed by laws which define reality. So the fact that holiness is asking of us to cease from what we're doing and suspend all things that are connected to the mundane, this too is limited. So just like there's a physical nature that defines and the physicality of things, so does the realm of the spiritual have its nature. Spirituality has its own set of laws which define what it is, where it is, when it exists, and when it cannot exist, and in what manner it can be felt, even when it goes beyond the boundaries of the spiritual. So transcendence, which we're talking about in holiness, is a definition because it defines something as beyond and distinct from materiality. So in the Torah, in the book of Genesis, it says, God concluded on the seventh day the work that he had done. So this seems to be a contradiction to another part of the verse that says, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work he had done. So if we're saying that the work of creation was concluded on the seventh day, then the seventh day would seem to be one of those days of creation. But if the seventh day is the day on which God rested from the work he had done, then really there were only 6 days of creation, and the seventh day of Shabbos was ceasing from work. So what was the world lacking that it still needed? It was lacking rest. And when Shabbat came, rest came. Meaning, it doesn't mean, I'm laughing because I was going to say, it doesn't mean you go to sleep when you light candles and you wake up when Shabbos is over. But I have to say, I won't say which, but one of my daughters, when she was in seminary in Israel, went to stay with my friends Yitzhak and Sophia Kogan. Yitzhak Kogan was called the holy man, the tzaddik of Leningrad. He was just, I could go on and on with stories about him. Maybe I will end, actually. If I remember, somebody remind me, I will end the class with a story about him. But she was so excited, she and a friend, that they were going to have the honor to spend Shabbos there. And after they lit candles, they went to sleep. And Sophia knew that they were seminary girls and maybe they wouldn't want to be woken up. And I think they slept till basically the end of Shabbos. So that's not what we're talking about. That's not the kind of rest we're talking about. We're talking about transcendence and spirituality. That itself is very important. And that the spiritual gives us an opportunity to have rest on a very different level. So, to continue, if the number 7 defines the natural reality, 8, because Shemini, the name of the Parsha, Shemini, is 8. Shemini represents that which is higher than nature. I have a son. Yosef was our 8th child, so we used to call him Mashiach child because he was above nature, one above nature. But then we had quite a few more above nature. So 7 includes both the material and the spiritual, both mundanity and holiness, both involvement and transcendence. But they're each separate and distinct components of this whole cycle of creation. It says the 7th dimension will exert an influence on the other 6, but only in a transcendent way, as a spiritual, otherworldly reality. And 8 represents the introduction of a reality that is beyond all nature and definition, transcendence. And it has no limitations at all. All transcendence is all pervasive, and it goes beyond nature, but it is present within the nature. So we have the covenant of circumcision, which binds the Jew to God in a bond that supersedes all nature. And this is entered into on the 8th day of life, and we're going to go into this a little more later. So the Mishkan, which was the sanctuary, whose role was to make the infinite reality of God an indwelling presence in the physical world, that God would have a place to dwell in physicality. And this was inaugurated on the 8th day after 7 days of training. So the 7 days were when the Mishkan was put up, taken down, put up, were 7 days of training. And I think it's very important, just that whole idea of training, to understand that in anything we do and we want to succeed in, we need to be trained. Training is very important. You know, I think the old apprentice system was a wonderful system, that you could shadow somebody and you could be trained and learn how to manage, learn many things, how to speak to people. I remember once my oldest son was 16 or 17 at the time, and we were sitting in the living room of my house, and my dearly beloved friend Sarah Berman, who's no longer in this world, but really brought me to the Lubavitch Rebbe in essence. So she wanted to have a talk with me. She wanted to talk to me about something privately, and she said to my son Shalom Shaya, she said to him, would you please leave the room because I want to talk to your mother privately? And he said, no. He said, I'm not going to leave the room, because how will I learn how to talk to people if I don't listen to how she's talking to you? And so my friend Sarah looked at him, she goes, you can stay. So training is important, and we're saying here that there was a training period before this establishment of the 8th day. We know the festival of Shemini Atzeres, who is a holiday that comes at the end of the holiday of Sukkot, and it's to internalize the transcendent light that comes into the Sukkah, and that also comes, so you have 7 days of Sukkot, and then you have the 8th day, which is Shemini Atzeres. The 7 Shemitah cycles, meaning 7 cycles of 7 years, are followed by a Jubilee year, which is a year of freedom from all bounds. It's not a suspension. It means slaves go free, indentured servants go free, land goes free. There are many, many details to it. And it says that all prophets prophesied only regarding the days of Mashiach, meaning regarding the world to come. So that's a little beginning on the Parsha, on the 8th day, and we're going to continue with, so the Kli Yakar commentary, this is also a teaching from the Lubavitch Rebbe, explains, on the 8th day, and he's implying again a connection to the preceding 7 days, this prepared the final erection of the sanctuary. It says, your inauguration will last 7 days, and during these 7 days, the altar was dedicated. But the 8th day had a different purpose. This was for the dedication of Aaron and his sons, who were the Kohanim. Why was it then given a name that implied it was a continuation of the previous 7 days? Because it was a new creation, the 8th day. So the explanation is the name was intended to highlight the uniqueness of the day on which God will reveal himself to you. The 8th day has a unique quality of holiness, and the Kli Yakar explains the number 7 always refers to the mundane, while the number 8 refers to holiness. So now we're coming back to the mitzvah of circumcision that supersedes the prohibition of forbidden labor on Shabbos. So technically, a circumcision involves a procedure where there is a cutting, which is not permitted. It's one of the things that are forbidden on Shabbos. But if the 8th day falls on Shabbos, that supersedes the observance of that mitzvah on Shabbos. Because circumcision is associated with the number 8, and Shabbos is associated with the number 7. And the spiritual takes precedence over the material. So the expression that 7 refers to the mundane can't be taken strictly in a literal sense, for the 7th day is also holy. We know that Shabbos is one of the 7 days of creation. and it shares a connection to the mundane world. The number 8 is above creation and is set aside for him, blessed be he. So it says that in comparison to the level of 8, Shabbos is considered mundane. It's part of that cycle of the 7-day-a-week cycle. And there are other concepts also that explain the unique holiness of the number 8. So it says that in the time of Mashiach, in the era of redemption, there will be a harp that will be playing in the Holy Temple, and it will have 8 strands. When the Beis Hamikdash stood in Jerusalem in previous times, there was a harp that played, and it had 7 strands. Now, that harp was holy. Nevertheless, when it's compared to the transcendent holiness of the era of redemption, then the earlier harps can be considered mundane. I mean, if we could just visualize that holiness, that level of holiness, and how the holiness that we're going to draw down and be given in this world in the future is going to even supersede that holiness that was present during the times of the Beis Hamikdash. Can't wait. So it says that we can see this with the Torah, that the Torah is holy. And it says, however, the Torah of the present era, when compared to the Torah we will be studying in the future time, is of a different level. So when the Kli Yakar is answering these questions, it seems that he's really reinforcing the questions rather than answering the questions, because the number 8 is associated with a rung that is set aside for God above the natural order. And it seems to have no connection to that natural pattern of 7 when you call it 8 and when you call it transcendent. So why does the Torah use the term the 8th day? Because the 8th day implies it's connected to the previous 7. Otherwise, it would have been called something else. So the problem can be resolved in this way, that all the revelations of the era of the redemption, when Mashiach will come, are dependent on our divine service now. The revelations are connected with the rung of 8, a rung so elevated that it cannot be connected or reached by the divine service that we are doing now. Instead, these revelations have to come from God, because there are 2 ways of arousal. There's arousal from above to below, and then there's arousal from below to above. And it's called the arousal from above to below. It's like a gift that's given. It's given without hard work. It descends on us. So it says the future redemption also will come in the month of Nisan, because Nisan is associated with an arousal from above, meaning a revelation of godliness that he created as he grabbed us out of Egypt. That came from above. It didn't come from any work that we were doing in the physical. However, that there is a dependence on drawing down spirituality that does depend on our divine service. If not, we could go lie on the beach in Bali and do nothing all day and just wait for that divine service, that glow to come to us. But no, we need to put out an effort. And after we have perfected our divine service and we've drawn down revelations, remember when you say a blessing, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech, you're drawing godliness down upon yourself. That's why when you're doing a mitzvah and you're saying a blessing, like when I said the blessing on my tea, like if one could just for a second remember that when you're saying that blessing, you're drawing godliness down. That's so powerful. It means be conscious of what we're doing. So so after we draw down this revelation, then we will, that that we're able to draw down, that will draw down even further the revelations that will come from God from above that we're not able to draw down. So there's an example. There are 2 levels of Shabbos. One level is associated with the 7 days of creation, and in comparison to the 6 days that precede it, it is holy. However, its holiness is within the natural order and is drawn down through the divine service of the Jewish people because we are commanded to make the Shabbos holy. So there are levels. This level divides into 2 rungs. One is a dimension of Shabbos, which is sacred, holy on its own accord. That's called the arousal from above. And this precedes our divine servants. But it draws down only the external dimension of light. The aspect of Shabbos, which is a present, like we like presents, is a present, comes after our divine service and reveals the inner dimension of the light. And with regard to this rung, it is said, and the children of Israel shall keep the Shabbos, because this level of holiness is revealed from above, but we have to keep it. We have to protect it, and we have to make it our own. If we don't keep it, it doesn't happen. It happens in the world, but it doesn't happen in our life. There is a level that is drawn down solely through our divine service, and that's why we're told to make the Shabbos. Like you could call somebody up and you could say, are you making Shabbos this week? What does that mean, making Shabbos this week? Shabbos is coming into the world. But are you connecting to it? Are you preparing for it? Are you excited about it? So another dimension of Shabbos is its role as a microcosm, meaning that if this level gives us a foretaste of the era of redemption, but it's not the era of redemption. It's not the same. That Shabbos as a whole, even this level that was given as a present after our divine service, is still connected to the number 7. And so we are still working. We're still working for that transcendent level. So the era, Shabbos and the era of redemption is described as the day which is all Shabbos and rest for eternity. That's the level we're striving for. And this level is not drawn down only from our divine service, but requires initiative from above. So the sages quote God as saying, I have a superb present in my treasure store, and it is called Shabbos. This higher level of Shabbos is a present from above, but like a present, it's not earned. It depends on the generosity of the donor. Because when a gift is given because of the effort you put in, it's something that you earn. The term, to use the word present, is really not appropriate. So even this higher level of Shabbos is given because it was preceded by the divine service that we are doing. There's a saying, whoever works before Shabbos eats on Shabbos. So if you want to have bean soup, you got to soak them and cook them before Shabbos because there's no one that's going to be able to eat hard beans. You might be able to eat uncooked dandelion root, but there's no way you're eating a hard bean. So when you work before, you have what to eat. So it says that it reflects a statement of our sages that there's a statement, it says, if a person did not generate pleasure for him, he would not have given him a present. Meaning, although a present is given because the recipient generated pleasure for the donor, what is given is worth more than the pleasure generated. And for that reason, it is considered a present. So it says there are many concepts, similar concepts that apply to the revelations of the 8th day of the dedication of the sanctuary. Even though these revelations have their source in a level that cannot be drawn down through our divine service, they still were given after the 7 days of dedication, meaning after the man's service had been perfected. And this day is referred to as the 8th day because the revelations of this day come after and are dependent on the divine service of the 7 preceding days. So, L'chaim, still have many high center cups available for the taking, and they've all been toivel. They've all gone to the mikveh. It's an extra bonus, thanks to Robin. Okay, so often this Parsha Shemini is read on the first Shabbos after Pesach, which begins the counting of the Omer. And it is possible to explain this connection between Parsha Shemini and this period. So we're in the middle of the week of Gevurah, and yesterday was the quality of Tiferes, which is beauty or harmony in Gevurah. And we're charged, the Torah is telling us, count 50 days. So, but our practice is only to count 49 days. So the way we count is we count there are 7 weeks, and each week has 7 days, and there are 7 of these sphirot of energy emanations, and each one is included in the other. And that equals 49. The 50th day becomes the holiday of Shavuos, and that is not counted as a day of the Omer. So now there's a little problem. It says, our divine service follows the pattern. You shall count 7 weeks, which parallel the 7 days of creation, and the spiritual heights of refinement of our personalities and qualities and traits. And this is associated with the 49 days that we count, and it is associated with Bina, with the gates of understanding, but the 50th level is above. The 50th level is beyond the mortal grasp. However, after we draw down these 49 levels through our divine service, we are granted the 50th level from above. And it says, this also explains why this level is drawn down on Shavuos, because this commemorates the giving of the Torah. And the giving of the Torah is the foretaste of the era of redemption, the era of Mashiach. And for this reason, the verse says, count 50 days, because the 50th level is granted to the Jewish people as a result of their divine service. And the counting of the Omer does more than prepare us for the giving of the Torah. The counting is a preparation for this era of redemption. So there is a verse, and it says, and the day, as in the days of your exodus from the land of Egypt. So the use of the term days raises a difficulty, because the Jews left Egypt on one day. That's it. They were grabbed and taken out of Egypt, which was the 15th of Nisan. So the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe explained that the exodus from Egypt will not be complete until the future redemption. Egypt, Mitzrayim in Hebrew, refers to spiritual boundaries and limitations. Mitzarim are limitations. So it says, from the 15th of Nisan, when the Jews were taken out of Egypt, until the present, we are in the midst of our departure from Egypt, and we're striving higher and higher. So this process of exodus involves periods of ascent and what looks like descent. So there is a verse, and it says, for a tzaddik, a righteous person, falls 7 times and rises again. So it seems to imply that the falls are for the sake of the ascent which follows. This fall is necessary, and it's a phase of what we call bitul, or self-nullification, that comes between one level and the next. You have to leave the level you were on before in order to enter the level that you're going higher towards. And it says that there's a similar pattern when we talk about the descent of godly light. That there has to be an aspect of a state of nothingness between one level of light and the level below it. It has to have that period before it ascends and grows. With regard to man's divine service, since a descent is necessary in order to ascend to a higher rung, it can't be really considered a true descent, but it's a phase in the ascent. Okay? So, for the intent of the creation, which involves the descent of godly light through a chain-like progression of spiritual realms. So it says the world was created through a quality called Tzimtzum, and it was the contraction of godly light from its brightest, contracting and contracting and contracting, to be able to actually be used without the whole world and creation absorbing itself into godly light. So its purpose is for the ascent after. So this is God's intent that as soon as this phrase of descent was concluded, and as soon as one of the levels of Tzimtzum was concluded, that the phase of ascent began, because this is the way God created the world and created us to be able to exist in the world. The intent of creation, meaning the ascent, preceded the creation itself. And although a person has been given free choice, this choice involves only certain particular elements of creation. It cannot change the path of creation as a whole, because the path of creation is a constant ascent. And on a deeper level, it can be explained that this concept is reflected within the microcosm, for every person's path is one of ascent. Our free choice determines only the rate of ascent. Very powerful. It says, if mankind merits, I will hasten it, meaning the future redemption. And if not, it will come in its time. Similarly, a person's choice can determine the pattern of ascent. Will it follow a path that gives evil a foothold, and afterwards then they can rectify it and destroy that evil? Or will it follow a course that does not involve any backward steps at all? So it goes on to teach that the first service performed by the Jews after the physical departure from Egypt was counting the days until the giving of the Torah. A counting which parallels the counting of the Omer. So the counting of the Omer is a reflection of our first strides towards the era of redemption. And that is the era that is associated with the number 8. So now the question comes, why is the Omer counted at night? This is atypical, for the Omer was considered a sacrifice. It was an offering of barley, because what we're working on is we're working on refining our animal soul during this time of the Omer. And when we're refining our animal soul, we're refining the different qualities. And so that barley, even though today we put barley in our chillin, in previous times it was considered animal food only. And this was the offering for your animal that was brought to the sanctuary. And counting the Omer involves counting the number of days, since since the offering of the Omer, and it's offered during the day. And again, the question is asked, why is the counting done at night? So we compare the era of redemption, the exodus from Egypt, and the giving of the Torah. The exodus from Egypt and even the giving of the Torah was characterized from a revelation from above and not by the divine service of the Jewish people. Although they did count 49 days until the giving of the Torah, it was impossible to raise from the 49 levels of impurity in such a short time. They couldn't rectify themselves completely from the time they left Egypt until the giving of the Torah. So when the divine presence retreated after the giving of the Torah, the world remained in its material state. And the absence of this permanent development was reflected in what? In the sin of the golden calf, which was the source of all subsequent sins. And our sages say there is no divine retribution that does not contain a certain measure of retribution for the sin of the golden calf. The future redemption, the number 8 redemption, will be brought about by the divine service of the Jewish people, which began when we left Egypt. The object is that every person refine not only themselves, but their portion of the world, making it possible for nature to encompass divine revelation. You know, when I was in India, it was very interesting. There was one night, I was with my daughter, Nachamadina, and we were in Mumbai. And it was after Shabbos, and I haven't been everywhere in India. I've been many places. And it's not like you have a beautiful, rich, highly developed, clean, safe, neighborhood, and then the slums or the homeless or the street sleepers and everything are in a different part of the city. No, everything is entwined. So after Shabbos, my daughter went to go to sleep at the hotel, and I went out exploring, and I went into the slum that was right next door, really a block away from our hotel. And there was a street, and the street had shacks on each side, but the street was absolutely spotless. And there were women sitting outside almost all of these homes. It was hot. It was a hot night. And they were sitting on, plastic chairs, like I used to see the old women in Far Rockaway, New York, sitting on their beach chairs outside their houses on the hot nights. And I actually went back and woke up my daughter and brought her there. And we stayed all night speaking to these women. And one of the things they told me was the pride they took in keeping their street clean. That maybe the other streets weren't, and maybe the other areas weren't, but they understood that they were trying to refine themselves and also their portion of the world, their portion of their life. And it was very, very significant, and it was very, very meaningful. So we're making it possible for nature to encompass this divine revolution. And it says the glory of God will be revealed, and all flesh will see godliness. For physical flesh will perceive the glory of God. Sounds good. And as stated above, right now we are not fit to receive the revelations of this era of redemption. But when our divine service evolves and reaches a level of perfection, God then will give higher levels, higher revelations on his own initiative. And this light will be incomparably higher than our powers of conception. And today it is impossible to tap this level of light. We don't have Mashiach yet. We don't see that light yet in the world. but it will be internalized within the world. And the counting of the Omer is the first element of divine service leading to redemption. The counting of the Omer begins with the offering of the Omer, meaning there's an ongoing connection with the holiness of the service in the Beis HaMikdash. And the whole intention of this counting is to refine the world and repair it for revelation. So we're refining ourselves and we're refining our portion of the world, and then we're refining the world for this revelation. And therefore, the counting follows the order of creation. It says, first there was darkness, and then there was light. So with regard to the sacrifices, night follows day. But when we talked about the creation, it says, and it was evening, and it was morning. So our rationale is generally our divine service works in an ascending order. We begin with darkness, and through our efforts, the world is refined and made fit to receive divine light. The service in the Beis HaMikdash had a different intent. It was to reveal godly light from above. This activity begins with the day, and the night follows day. And this is an approach of refining of material entities that is associated with light, because revelation empowers one to descend into darkness and to refine the darkness. And the counting of the Omer is intended to refine the world and make it fit for redemption. So there is the pattern of first darkness, then light, refining the world through an ascending pattern. And the counting is dependent on the Omer. And this implies that this mitzvah has the power of the sacrifices, which is a revelation from above. And it says, ultimately, this mitzvah will lead to the time when revelations will be internalized. So we're just in a great time. That's all I can say. We're in a great time, and we have every possibility to ascend and to move forward. And we should each take on ourselves to refine ourselves and to refine our portion of the world. So here's we're going to do a piece on the Haftorah. But before that, here is a teaching that I saw today by Aaron Loshak that I thought was very, very interesting. So I'm going to share it with you. It says, are there some parts of Judaism that you prefer over others? I think everybody can answer yes to that question. Do certain rituals, practices, or customs excite you and others don't? I personally could say yes to that. And what the question here is asked, what do you do about the unexciting parts? And what do we have to learn? What is this Parsha teaching us about that? So there are different ways to approach this. So one way is somebody is disinterested, they're uninspired, they're turned off, so they turn their backs on what they don't like, and they focus maybe on what they do like. There's another is sort of an inner push to just do it anyway, regardless of whether a person likes it or not, but that's not actually ideal. So what do we do about the parts that we find uninteresting or uninspiring? It's a very deep question. So it says there's a story in this Parsha, and we went into the story in detail last week. It's really one of my favorite teachings in Torah. So it says, after the Jews finished constructing the tabernacle in the desert and all the inauguration ceremonies started to take place, and God's holy presence rested on the sanctuary, and the Jews were able to draw down a level of divine grace that came to them after the disaster of the golden calf. And among all this joy that was present, there was a tragedy that occurred. It says, Nadav and Avihu, who we learned about last week, the sons of Aaron the high priest, got carried away with their spiritual ecstasy of the moment. Their souls couldn't help it. They left their body. They offered up this offering, which was really themselves, and it led to their death. So now you have the sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, and you have two corpses that are laying at the holy site. So Moshe had to take care of this. The corpses needed to be removed. So he summoned Mishal and Eltzaphan, who were the sons of Aaron's uncle Uziel, and he said to them, draw near, carry your kinsmen from within the sanctuary to the outside of the camp. So Rashi explains it as a person would say to his fellow when someone had died at a wedding feast, remove the deceased from before the bride so as not to disturb the joyous occasion. So it was reasonable that the corpses needed to be removed. What doesn't seem to be reasonable was who was chosen to remove them. Mishal and Eltzaphan, for two reasons. They not only were the cousins of Nadav and Avihu, which made them Levites. So why would Moshe ask a Levite to carry out the task of removing the bodies? Because once they came in contact with dead bodies, they would be impure and unable to re-enter the tabernacle until 7 days of purification had passed. Why would Moses deny them the opportunity of being part of this team of Levites that had this blessing of being able to serve in the temple? Why couldn't he ask Israelites to carry out the bodies, since they don't serve in the temple anyway? And also, these were first cousins. Why would he choose such close relatives? So the teaching is, by specifically choosing Levites and first cousins, Moshe was giving a very important message about what it means to serve in the tabernacle. It's not only the glamorous jobs of singing and praying and offering sacrifices, it's whatever needs to get done, period. If that means removing corpses, that was just another form of service, just like swaying in a long robe and singing hymns to God. Both Mishal and Eltzaphan carried out the job without a word of dissent. Today was the day. Finally, the nation came back into the blessings of God, and the divine presence was manifest in this new, beautiful structure. Everyone was joyfully anticipating stepping into the role of divine servant in this way, and yet here they were, taken away from this job, excluded from the festivities, and only given two dead corpses to take care of. And their first cousins, while the entire nation sang and rejoiced, they were with their departed cousins. And because they understood that serving God has many forms, one moment you're singing in the temple, the next moment you're removing a corpse to facilitate that singing. It doesn't matter. Whatever God throws at you, you do it. If you like it, fabulous, amazing. If not, you relish the opportunity to do something for God and not for yourself. So there's a very well-known story about the two famous brothers, Rabbi Elimelech of Lezhensk and his brother Reb Zusha of Annapolis. And one night they were thrown in jail on some trumped-up charges that were always being levied against the Jews. And they were thrown into a prison cell. And they wanted to daven, Ma'ariv, whatever service was coming up. And there was a pail, instead of a toilet, there was a pail for that necessity in the middle of the prison cell. And they realized that they would not be able to pray because you are not permitted to pray in the presence of bad odors or trash or filth or anything of that nature. And Rabbi Elimelech was distraught, and his brother Rabbi Zusha turned to him and said, Elimelech, why are you down? The same God who instructed us to pray instructed us that we cannot do so in the presence of filth. So tonight we are serving God by not praying. And then they got so happy about serving God that they joined hands and they burst into song and dance at their new opportunity to serve God in a different way. And it says that the guards came in and they said, what's all this commotion? What's all this singing and dancing? What is all this happening? And the other prisoners pointed to the pail in the middle of the room, and they said, they're singing because of this pail. They're joyous because of this pail. And the guard said, they are? Well, I'll show them. And he took the pail out of the cell, and then the smells were all gone, and the filth was gone, and then they were able to pray to God. So they understood what Mishal and Eltzaphan understood, that God doesn't need you to serve him in one particular way. There are many ways to serve God. So if you're struggling to come to terms with different parts of Judaism, trying to appreciate why it's important to do something or wrong to do other things, remember these examples, that there were the cousins that were not able to serve in the joyous ceremonies, and there were the dancing rabbis with the wastebasket, but they used both of these experiences as a way to connect with God and be part of the master plan. So I thought that was a beautiful teaching. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the Haftorah for this week. So I'm going to interrupt myself. It's better than having somebody interrupt me. Then I can only blame myself. So I don't know. I don't think I told this story. I might have. I take a class with a wonderful rabbi every morning. I want to advertise him, Rabbi Brander. 15 minutes of learning a day. It's perfect. You start your day with learning. It's 15 minutes. He's warm, engaging. And sometimes he tells the same story week after week saying, I don't remember if I told this story. So I learned the details very well. And mostly they're always fabulous stories. So this story I just listened to this week again because I told it and I knew I had forgotten some of the pieces of the story. So I want to share it with you. And it's connected to Pesach. So the story was told by Rabbi Meir Lau, who was the head rabbi chief rabbi of Israel. And he said that there was a Russian Jew who came to him. He was 42 years old. He had just made Aliyah. And he wanted to have, like the stamp of approval that he's a Jew. And so he was required for this meeting to bring two witnesses. And he brought two witnesses. One man, they're both Russian. One man, an old Russian man, says, yes, I was present at his bris when he was a baby. The other man said, I knew his mother. And how did I know his mother? And he said that his mother was the director of a hospital, and she had a very important job. And as part of the perks of this very important job, she was given 2 cigarettes a day. Now, in all the years when I can't say growing up, before I went to the Ukraine, the years before I went to the Ukraine, I always heard of people going to the Ukraine and Russia, and always the way you could get anything was to take cigarettes. Just take cigarettes with you. You can bribe people. They're very happy to have them. American cigarettes. And I never really believed it. I thought, come on, that's ridiculous. I can't believe that. But when we went, we took a lot of cigarettes, cartons of cigarettes, and it got us into Reb Zusha of Annapolis in a minute. First, they couldn't find the key anywhere, couldn't find the key. My husband took out a carton of cigarettes. The key was found. Things like that. So anyway, this woman, the director of the hospital, was given as a perk 2 cigarettes a day. And she loved cigarettes. So 1 cigarette she smoked, and the other cigarette she put in a box under her bed. And when she had 365 cigarettes, and it was Purim time, this rabbi who's telling the story that he knew the mother, says she would come to me and she would give me this box of 365 cigarettes. And I would take them and I would sell them on the black market. And then I was able to buy flour in order to bake matzahs for her. And the whole year she saved 1 cigarette a day in order to be able to have matzah on Pesach. So when Rabbi Lau heard this story, he asked this man, is your mother still alive? And he said, yes. And he said, I'd like to call her. And he calls her up and he says to her, he says, when I celebrated Pesach, I'm involved with matzah 1 day a year. And that's on the night of the Seder. But you are involved with matzah for 365 days a year. So, l'chaim, okay. So the Haftarah of this portion relates how King David brought the Ark of God. Now, I just want to say something about King David. I had the good fortune, when I lived in Jerusalem, to live for almost a year on top of, not at the top of the building that the tomb of David was in. It was on Mount Zion, and I lived on this rooftop, hundreds of years old apartment, looking out at all of Jerusalem. And it was really quite a privilege to live there. But I just want to make a point of saying that the first palace of King David was in the holy city of Hebron, that he lived in Hebron for 7 years before moving to Jerusalem. And if and when, come with me this summer, I just read the list of regulations. It looks like maybe Israel is opening up this summer so far, and for non-Israelis, and it said you have to, test and have, all those things connected to COVID, but you also have to have a direct relative. So I am very lucky to have a daughter that lives in Jerusalem, and I have a grandson that's in the army. So there's a good chance that you could come with me to Hebron this summer, I'm hoping. We'll see. But it's important to know that you can see artifacts from the grounds of King David's palace. Yes, Sherry, you're coming. Everybody's coming. I just want to say, before we start, since Sherry mentioned Sfat, Big Mo from Sfat, who I have worked with for the last 28 years, is coming to Los Angeles this week. Mazel tov to Mo and his son Moshe and his wife Simcha. They had a baby boy, and there will be a bris this week, and Big Mo will be in town. I won't, but he will. Okay, so I just also want to say next week the class is going to be from Miami again, and I will be there, and I will have the class next week. I'm going to help my daughter-in-law, who is presenting her master's thesis and needs help watching those very cute grandchildren for the week. So, okay, so now the Haftarah. So it relates how King David HaMelech, brought the Ark of God from the house of Oved Edom the Gittite to the city of David. And along the way it says, David danced with all his might before God, and he was girded with a linen ephod. An ephod was, there were different garments, and it was like an apron, like an overgarment. When they came to the city of David, it says that King David leaped and danced before God. So these two verses, the first one that relates to outside the city, and the second one to inside the city of David, differ. In the first one, it said that David was girded with a linen ephod, and in the latter sentence, there is no mention of it. In the first one, it says only that David danced, while in the second verse states that he leaped and danced. What do these differences teach us? Because we have to remember that every nuance, every word, every phrase in the Torah is significant. There is another nuance to this story that we have to understand. It says Michal, who was King David's wife, and she was the daughter of King Shaul, when she saw King David leaping and dancing, she mocked him. And David answered her, "Before God who chose me above your father, I will be yet more demeaned than this." All he needed to explain was the reason for his joy. Why then did he first interject, "who chose me above your father"? So that's what we're going to be looking into. Rambam says of the linen ephod that it is not one of the 8 priestly garments. For the ephod of the high priest was not made of linen only, but of blue wool and red wool. So there's another little piece, a commentary I want to pull up here. Okay, one second. Okay, here it is. So it says that this linen ephod was a special garment worn by apprentice prophets, indicating that they had been worthy, they had attained the level of being worthy of receiving prophecy. And it was fashioned after the garment of the high priest, the ephod of the high priest, because the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, attained prophetic insight through what we call the Urim and Tumim inside the breastplate that was affixed to the ephod. So there was a breastplate, and it had different jewel stones on it. And questions were asked, and there were answers given by the lighting up. It's very, very detailed and very interesting, of course. But the fact that David was wearing this garment indicates that he was hoping this time to receive prophetic insight, as opposed to the first time he tried to bring the ark to Jerusalem, when he committed a grave error of transporting it on a wagon instead of by hand. David took inspiration from the uninhabited setting that was outside the city to mentally exclude himself from all the house of Israel who accompanied him, since mental seclusion is one of the prerequisites of prophecy. This is why he sang and danced, in order to induce the joy that was the prerequisite to prophecy. So joy, is that interesting? It tells you that joy was a prerequisite to prophecy. So Rambam, so it says that of the prophet Shmuel, who was a Levite, he said he was a lad girded with a linen ephod. So Rambam explains that this was a garment worn by the disciples of the prophets for one who is fit for what we call Ruach HaKodesh, which is the Holy Spirit to dwell upon him, for that inspiration directly from God, to indicate that for the high priest would speak with this Ruach HaKodesh through the means of the breastplate and the ephod. So that it was a transmission, so to speak, of divinity in order to be able to answer people. Prophecy is an exalted state, for the Shekhinah rests only on a person that is wise and strong and wealthy and tall. I'm not tall, so I guess I don't have prophecy. So even in that, I don't know what the tall means. I'm going to investigate and come back with a report. Even in that state, the garments were important to the point it said that he also stripped off his clothes and prophesied. To be girded with a linen ephod was a sign that one was fit and ready for the Holy Spirit, for this Ruach HaKodesh to rest upon them. And we find this in a statement of Rambam in the Sefer of Yerushalmi. It says in Nov, which was the city of priests, there were 85 priests who wore a linen ephod. Explains that they were all fit to be high priests. Seclusion is one of the ways to prepare towards a state of prophecy. And generally speaking, this is done by being away from a city. So when King David was on the way, he was outside the city. And this was the main place to prepare towards the state of prophecy. And it's mentioned there that he wore this linen ephod. It was there he danced with all his might before God, because the Shekhinah dwells only where there is joy. Again, I think this is so important. The Shekhinah dwells only where there is joy. The word for dancing can also be translated that he praised. He offered songs and praises to the Almighty in order to evoke a manifestation of prophecy. Because it is well known, I found out it's well known, that songs and praises evoke latent powers of prophecy. When the Torah is speaking of the rejoicing within the city of David, it mentions also leaping, a term that indicates more increased and intense dancing. Outside the city, it was not so intense, or there was no dancing at all. Hasidus explains that dancing is a reaction to a sense of permeating joy, which penetrates to the very core of one's being, to the point of affecting even the legs. The term leaping is mentioned only in the second verse. The joy outside the city was related to a certain expectation, meaning a means towards an end. And what was the end? Prophecy and this indwelling of the Shekhinah, this presence of God. That joy, because there was a goal, an end, was limited and not fully penetrating. That was the joy being outside the city. The joy within the city of David was devoid of any expectations. It was unrestricted, and it was manifested by this leaping, just unbounded joy. We can understand now why Michal, the daughter of Shaul, disapproved of King David leaping and dancing before God in the city of David. Torah law decrees that one is not to see a king when he is in a state that might weaken the impact of "you shall surely set over you a king," that his awe be on you. Awe meaning A-W-E. For the king to rejoice excessively in public can still be considered seemly behavior. One can understand this from a rational point of view. But to leap and dance within the city of David, to behave in an unrestricted way beyond reasonable norms, that appeared to Michal as altogether unacceptable. This is why David answered her, "Who chose me above your father?" With these words, he indicated to her the difference between his form of worship and that of her father. Shaul's avoda was based on rational criteria. This is why he did not want to exterminate Amalek completely. So if you remember the story, that the nation of Amalek was captured, and there is a law, a mitzvah, commandment by God to eradicate totally every man, woman, child, cattle, fruit-bearing trees, everything of Amalek, pure evil, pure evil. And Shaul rationally took pity on the king and on some of the cattle. And he did not eradicate them with the rest of the nation. And the king was able to have relations and give birth to descendants, which we consider Haman, Hitler, descendants of Amalek that should have been wiped out by Shaul, but he wasn't because of his rational consideration. So from a rational point of view, it makes sense to spare the best of the flocks and cattle in order to sacrifice them to God, your God. As Shaul said to Samuel the prophet, David thus said, who chose me above your father. Shaul, who followed reason, had the monarchy taken away from him, and it was given to David. For David's avoda, his service, was to serve with Kabbalas ol, and we've learned many times Kabbalas ol means wearing the yoke of heaven. It is written, David my servant, and if one wishes for the monarchy to endure, it must be with Kabbalas ol. It must be by following the laws of God. I will be yet more demeaned. I will be abased without any restrictions on the part of reason. So, two things. So, when David mentioned Saul, when replying to Michal, it says again, Saul served God rationally, which is why he didn't want to annihilate the innocent among the Amalekites. But by choosing David over Shaul, God demonstrated we must serve him with all aspects of our being, and especially those above rationality, meaning with unbounded joy and with simple devotion and discipline. Today, we are on the threshold of the Messianic redemption and the reinstatement of the Ark and the Temple in Jerusalem. And it says here, we can and we should adopt David's unbounded singing and dancing as an essential component of our practice of Judaism. So now we're going into a footnote where it's talking about folly. To ignore reason is folly, because folly can be on two opposing levels. Irrational, meaning below and counter to reason, or supra-rational, meaning transcending reason. The former, the folly that is counter to reason, that is below, is called the folly of evil. For example, it says that no person sins unless a spirit of folly has entered into them. One does not ponder their holy soul, and all its doings are like those of a beast, which neither considers or knows. That's from the Zohar. An act transcending reason, which is supra-rational behavior, is referred to as a folly of holiness. It means that one is so enthused with mitzvahs and holiness that one transcends the limitations of duty to the point of supra-rational behavior, which externally may appear silly or foolish. So in the Gemara, there's a story of Rabbi Shemuel ben Rabbi Yitzhak. It says that he would dance before brides with 3 twigs, which he used to throw up one after the other and catch them in turn. and he did so to perform the mitzvah of amusing the groom and bride and causing them joy. And Rabbi Zera commented on this behavior by that sage, Rabbi Shmuel, and it says, the old man is putting us to shame by behaving improperly and foolishly. And it says, when Rabbi Shmuel died, a pillar of fire appeared and separated him from all others, which according to our tradition happens only for one or at most two in any generation, meaning for extraordinary saints. The story concludes that Rabbi Shmuel merited this privilege by virtue of his strange behavior. As the Gemara puts it, his folly benefited him. In other words, his enthusiastic involvement in a mitzvah, which externally may appear as folly, merited him to reach a superior level. The folly of holiness is an avoda, a spiritual work of total Kabbalah's ol, of wearing the yoke of heaven, with total self-negation, disregarding personal mind and reason, even the intellect of holiness. And this is the work, this is what we're talking about when we're talking about King David. So we have a custom, there's a Hasidic custom to dance, clap, so forth on Shabbos and festivals, to be filled with joy. And it says this is the general practice. And if you are not in a place of joy, one of the things we learn from Tanya is that in a Jew's heart, they can hold joy and weeping at the same time. So that even though there might be causes and places to be weeping by, we are still commanded to have joy. And in the fashion of David my servant, meaning leaping and dancing before God. Because for a person to rejoice in the fulfillment of a mitzvah and in love of God, who gave us these mitzvahs, is a supreme act of divine worship. So whoever knew, Fillmore Auditorium prepared us for lots of joy and dancing. I always felt the Fillmore, I guess I should say lahavdil, to separate the holy from the mundane. But I always felt it was my preparation in going to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Because when I would go into the Fillmore Auditorium in San Francisco in the 60s, and I would, come in the back of the room, and let's say there were 3,000 people in the room, and it was packed back-to-back person, and my eye was on front of the stage. That's where my eye always landed. I want to be on the front of the stage. Not on the stage, but in front of it. And I would make my way with a lot of patience, made myself a little invisible, used pixie dust, and I would be able to go from the back to the front. And when I went to see the Rebbe the first time on a Simchas Torah, when there were I could say thousands of people packed into a small space, but in the women's section that I was in, maybe let's not exaggerate, let's say hundreds. And I put my eye in, I was in the back of the room, looked impossible, and I was able to use that skill to get to see the Rebbe. So I want to just conclude by talking again about Yom HaShoah, and which is tomorrow, and it's Israel's official day of Holocaust remembrance, when we remember the 6 million victims of the Shoah and the examples of heroism and resistance that occurred. And I printed out a little teaching from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of questions and answers, and I'm going to share them with you. So a question was asked him, do you have faith in humanity after the Holocaust? And he answered, The Holocaust represented perhaps the greatest failure humanity has ever known. It featured a combination of technical brilliance and bureaucratic efficiency, but dedicated to the most evil of all purposes. This is the greatest failing of humanity I can think of. But there is a very remarkable avenue called the Avenue of Righteous Gentiles in Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. 14,000 people are honored there, people whom any one of us would trust because they put their own lives at risk to save the lives of their neighbors and in some case of strangers. These were beacons of light in the midst of one of the worst darknesses humanity has ever known. And therefore, yes, we can trust humanity if humanity shows itself capable of acting for the sake of others and taking risks to save others from death. So I want to share two stories. I might have shared them before, but they're two stories that I know the people personally. So there's a woman that lives here in Los Angeles. Her name is Ellie, and she's from Holland. And she's a great-grandmother by now. And when she was a young child, she was 2 years old, and the Holocaust, they were deporting people. Her parents gave her, she was 2, and her sister, I believe, was 3, to a family they did not know before, strangers, a woman who lived in a farming community and had 8 children of her own. Her family, they were from Holland, all were blonde hair and blue eyes. And Ellie and her sister had dark brown hair and dark eyes. And they were hidden under the kitchen sink when people were around, a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. And at every simcha that Ellie had for her children in Los Angeles, she flew in family members from this family that saved her and her sister. And I was at a wedding of one of her daughters when this woman at that time who saved them was very old. And she spoke, and Ellie's sister translated for her. And she said that they lived in a farming village, and the village was circular, it was in a circle. And it was known that if anyone was caught hiding Jews, that not only would the Jews be killed, but they would be killed along with their whole entire family, which meant that by hiding these 2 young girls, not that maybe people wanted to, but were afraid for their own lives, but they overcame that fear to save lives. And they had these 2 little girls in their house. So they knew that the Nazis were inspecting the village. And they divided up into 2 groups. Because the village was circular, one group went this way and one group went that way. And then they were going to meet at the last house. But each group thought that this woman's house had been checked by the other group, and they never checked it, and they were able to survive that top to bottom, door to door, every nook and cranny search. So after the war, this woman wanted to keep these girls. They loved them. They were part of their family, and the parents had been killed. But there was an aunt and uncle that lived also in Holland, and they took the girls back, but they always kept up visits and a friendship with this family. And I heard this woman tell this remarkable story that if they were caught, her 8 children would have been killed right in front of her also. Then there's another story I heard from a man that I met in India. His family comes to a place where I go all the time, and we became friends. And after a few years, he told me that his grandparents his mother's parents had hidden Jews. And he said they lived in Poland, and they lived on the side of a mountain. So they were always able to see if Nazis were coming. There was no way to approach the house without coming a distance, so they always could see. And they had found in the woods 3 Jewish women, who they hid for about 3 years in their basement. And these women had been part of the resistance, and they were being looked for because they were transmitting, and then the Nazis came to look for them. And anyway, they were able to hide these women in under a trap door in the kitchen. So, and over that trap door, they had a huge, wooden crate full of potatoes and onions and whatever that was almost impossible to move, that they would put there when they saw the Nazis coming. And this man, Andrew, said his grandmother would send her own 4 children out into the woods when she saw the Nazis approaching, because in case when they would search their house and they would find these Jews, they wouldn't be able to kill her children also. And he tells the story of one day they came and they were searching everywhere in the house, and they saw this big crate over this trapdoor, and they were going to move it, and the grandmother saw it, and she went out and she ran in with 2 fat chickens, and she put her only 2 chickens in their hands, and she said, "Here, you must be so hungry. Go, fix yourself something to eat." And they were so excited, they took the chickens and they stopped the search, and they were able to save these people. So, these things are possible in the midst of this horror. And the next question that he was asked was, considering the devastation of the Holocaust, how can we feel hope in the Jewish future? So his answer was that Ezekiel the prophet, 26 centuries ago, saw the Jewish people as a valley of dry bones. And God said to Ezekiel, "The people say our hope is lost, but it is not lost, because I am going to take them out of their graves and bring them to the land of Israel." And Rabbi Sachs continues, "I see 3 signs of hope today, and they're remarkable. Today we have Israel, we have Judaism, and we have the Jewish people, all 3 of them stronger than they ever were before. And I don't need any more grounds for hope than that. Our hope is not destroyed." So I wanted to print out something to read to you, which I didn't, but I will next week, because Sina told me about an organization in Israel where different families in the Shomron are being supported and helped to develop their products and to get their products known and out into the world. And there is a fee per month, and I thought maybe groups of people could join together and be able to find a group and support a family that is producing and growing on the land and manufacturing and growing businesses and doing this type of work. And I will have all the information by next week. I just didn't have time to print it, look at it in detail and print it out. And that's what I think the hope is that we have Israel, and that we can help make Israel stronger and stronger, because the only thing that will protect all of us is a safe Israel. So there's one more. There was this story that that Rabbi Sachs told that I thought was so inspiring. Since I'm getting up into my older years and I have a goal, I want to read these stories of these people that live into their hundreds. So there was a Holocaust survivor who died in 2017, right before his 114th birthday. Yeah, you heard me right, 114th birthday. And he was born in Poland, and he was in the Lodz ghetto for 4 years, and then he was in Auschwitz, and his children died, and his wife died, And he was like a shell of a person when he left Auschwitz. And he was raised religious, a religious Jew, and he always stayed religious. And he remarried, and he moved to Israel. He moved to Haifa. And he began a chocolate factory, a business. And it says, if you've ever had Israeli orange peel covered in chocolate, which I have had, or liqueur chocolate shaped like little bottles and covered with silver foil, I think we all had, you were enjoying one of the products he originated. And those who knew him said he was a person with no bitterness in his soul, and he wanted people to taste sweetness. I thought, look at that. He wanted people to taste the sweetness of life, and he created chocolates. So, L'chaim, everybody. Thank you all for coming to the class. And I want to wish everybody a beautiful week. And next week, we will have class. I will be in Miami, so it will be 11 p.m. for me, but 8 p.m. for you. Or if you're in Jerusalem, you'll be even better off. So, anyway, I want to thank everybody, L'chaim, and everybody should have a blessed, beautiful week. And we should take the message from the Parsha that we're approaching the era of Mashiach, and we should really be working on ourselves and in our environment and in our communities and just doing absolutely. Oh, Stephanie wants me to end with another story. Okay, Shavachaya. Good Shabbos. Oh my gosh, Svas. Now I'm in my element. I am so happy that Shavachaya is here. So I'm gonna share a story I said I would share a story about Yitzhak Kogan. So I'm going to share a story that was personal. I think I've shared this story before, but this is the first one that popped into my mind. Tonight I'm sharing old stories, I think, and a few new. So many years ago, probably about 9 years ago, I made a Sheva Brachas here in my house. Oh, we were talking about 7. That there are 7 days of Sheva Brachas for Eidan Tova. Wow. So let's see, sending love straight from Sfat. That sounds great. We're going to say L'chaim in Sfat. This is a great night. I'm going to say L'chaim from the Chai Center. So I'll tell a story before a story. I'm going to tell that story, but I just want to tell a story. So for Pesach, I had some out-of-town family that came. The first day, somebody came. The last day, so the last days of Passover, I had a son from New York. I had all my kids that live in, not all, but 2 of the families that live in Los Angeles came and stayed, and my son and his wife and family from Boston came and stayed. And one of the things in Boston is they have very few kosher restaurants. And my kids part of their vacation is going to great kosher restaurants. And everything had been closed. So after Passover, they were here a few days after things were open. And they went to the donut bagel store for that ultimate treat. And my son was wearing a chai hat. And he had a big mask over his face. You could not see who he was at all. It's kind of one of the advantages. If you don't like dressing up, you could just put a big mask on your face and nobody knows who you are. So he was in the store and he's wearing the chai cap, and this guy is in the store and looks at him. He goes, L'chaim, and so my son says, L'chaim, and the guy said, you have a chai cap. Did you know Schwartzy? So my son takes down his mask. He goes, yeah, that was my father. And it was this man who lives here in Los Angeles who said to him, I met your father for the first time 30 years ago. And the man was, his name, he was carrying tefillin, same as Reuven. He was carrying tefillin. He said, I met your father 30 years ago here in Los Angeles. And see these tefillin? Your father's the first person not only put tefillin on me, who showed me what tefillin are. And he said, and I wear them every single day of my life the way your father showed me. So that was like a highlight, a lovely story. And I do know this family, and I do know this man, and eventually they the family became observant of Judaism, and it's one of those beautiful stories of all the wonderful people we've met. Okay, so now back to the Yitzhak Kogan story. So I made Shiva Brachos in my house, and it was for a friend of mine. Her son married a Russian girl. And the wedding had been very small. There were just 50 people at the wedding. I was really privileged to be one of those 50 people. That was before Corona, when people thought, oh my God, 50 people. No one's ever heard of 50 people at a wedding. Now it's like, wow, you get to have 50 people at a wedding. So I guess it's all perspective. So I made Shiva Brachas, and we had 2 tables. We had 10 men, 10 women. And when the Russians came in, when the family of this bride came in, her father and her uncles and they came in with 3 huge bottles of vodka. And they put them on the table. And all I have to tell you is by the end of the evening, those bottles were gone. So a lot of l'chaims were made. So I said at some point in the evening, I said, I'd like to share a Russian story, So when I told the following story, I said, I have this friend, Izzy Kogan, Rabbi Izzy Kogan. He was known as the Tzaddik of Leningrad. And there is so many beautiful stories told about him. And one of the stories was that he was able to receive from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, through an American that came to visit, a bottle of vodka, not a big, a bottle of vodka that had been blessed by the Rebbe, and the Rebbe had poured from it, and a whole process of these bottles that were given out all over the world, especially to people behind the Iron Curtain, or people that needed to make a farbrengen and lift spirits and bring the joy that we were talking about. So this bottle was brought to Izzy, and he was very excited about it, and he decided to go with his wife, Sophia. He decided to go to Siberia, which was not legal. He did not have permission to go, but he decided to go to Siberia to make farbrengens with all the refuseniks of the time. Now, it's such a concept from years ago, and many people might not know what a refusenik is, but a refusenik was a Jew who applied to go to Israel to leave the terror and the oppression of Russia behind. And often they lost their jobs, like the Kogans did. They were persecuted. Sometimes they were put in Siberia. Many horrible things happened to them. And Izzy and Sophia decided that they would leave. They were living in Leningrad at the time. That they would leave, and they would go and they would make farbrengens to lift the spirits, to bring joy to all these refuseniks that were there. And so they boarded a train without a permit, without any permission, and at the time you needed permission to go even from city to city. And then they were going to take a flight. I don't remember the details of their travel, but they had to get to a boat, and that boat would cross the river, and there was could go certain times of the year in order to get to Siberia, where these refuseniks were. And so on the train, in Russia, there was a very big drinking problem, as you could tell by the Russians that came with more vodka than food to my party. And they searched people. They searched their luggage on the train, and they found this open bottle of vodka because the Rebbe had opened the bottle, poured from the bottle, said l'chaim from that bottle, and then closed it and gave it to somebody to bring when they were going to Russia to Izzy Kogan. So they said, we're going to have to confiscate this bottle from you. And he was like, there was nothing he could do. He didn't want to start arguing because he had no papers on him. And he said to them, could I pour out the vodka and then keep the bottle? And they said, yes, we'll watch you pour it out. And they went to a sink in the back, and he poured out all the vodka, and he was able to keep the bottle. And he's sitting there looking at the bottle, and he was a scientist, and he's sitting there and looking at the bottle, and all of a sudden he thinks, condensation, and he sees droplets of vodka that are not everything empty. There's still droplets in the bottle. So at the next station when he got out, he went and he bought more vodka, and he added it to this bottle, to the few drops that were left from the drops that were blessed by the Rebbe. And it's with this bottle, there are many more details to the story, but it's with this bottle that he went from person to person, saying l'chaim to all of them. I think he went to 13 or 14 people. And within that year, every single one of those refuseniks, including Ida Nudell, who had been in prison for maybe 13 years, I'm not sure how many years, every single one of them were released. And this is the story I told at this Sheva Brachas that was in my house. And the mother of the bride stood up and she said, my uncle, and she named his name, I don't remember, was one of those people that Izzy had visited, gave him a l'chaim from the Rebbe, and that they never thought he would be released, and he was released from Russian prison. So l'chaim to the number 8, above transcendence, above Shemini, above nature, that we should all be liberated from our own personal things that are holding us back, and that we should really dance with Mashiach. And most people say in Yerushalayim, I'm saying and Sfat, okay? So anyway, thank you all for coming to the class, and I'll see everybody, kind of see you next week. Bye-bye.